Hello everybody and welcome to a brief and late in the day weekly reading wrap-up. I'm trying to squeeze this in the evening. I've pretty much lost the natural light though, so this is why I don't usually film in the evenings. I'm also usually too tired. We're gonna breeze through some books today. I have 4 things to talk about. The first one is Inheritor by C.J. Cherryh. This is the 3rd book in the Foreigner universe. It is kind of the conclusion to the first trilogy story arc. It still leaves some things open. There are like 17 more books after this one, but it does actually address some of the big mysteries and absent characters from the first 2.5 books. So I buddy read this with Kazan from Always Doing. We read the first 3 books together actually, and it was really fun. I am rereading them and rediscovering what my brain vaguely remembers of my time reading these books when I was in my early teens, and I love them so much. This 3rd book though, I felt like the first half of it, I liked it, but it wasn't as exciting perhaps as the first 2 books had been, and then the last third got crazy good with all sorts of things suddenly happening, lots of action, lots of answers and stuff. So it was less of a balanced book for me in terms of enjoyment, but also what was actually happening. I just felt like all the interesting stuff was in the second half of the book. Still really enjoyed it though, and I plan on rereading the next 6 books, whereupon I will decide if I love the series enough to continue on with the other books, because there are so many of them now. Then I read the selected poems of Gabriela Mistral, translated by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is a poet I'd never heard of, except basically in Le Guin's bibliography. I'd known for a long time that Le Guin had translated some of Mistral's poetry into English. I decided I should finally just try to dig up that collection. So I did. And it was all right. There were only a couple of poems in this pretty lengthy collection that I really felt something when I read them. I'm not sure if I just didn't feel that connection with the place and the emotions of Mistral's poetry. She was a very famous and renowned Chilean poet. And interestingly, she also had a career as an educator, and she met and taught Pablo Neruda, another famous Chilean poet, I think when he was a teenager, but I don't think he was like a protege of hers or anything. But she's a fascinating person to learn about. Mostly I'm glad that I learned about her as a person and like her literary output, even if I didn't super love all of her poetry. I did really enjoy that this collection is bilingual. If I'm going to read translated poetry that was originally written in Spanish, I want to have the Spanish text there to compare to the English, because when I found like one of her poems that I did like, I would read it in English, but then I would try to read it in Spanish as well, and I can kind of muddle through it. I've lost so much of my Spanish, but I'm sort of getting a bit of it back by reading, original Spanish poetry. But anyway, so yeah, glad I checked this one out, but it did not hit the same buttons for me as the very small amount of poetry I've read by Neruda. So I think I'm gonna seek out more of Neruda's poetry and not really try to track down more by Mistral. Then I listened to the audiobook of a nonfiction book called Moonwalking with Einstein by Joshua Foer. And this is a book that's about memorization, about memory, but also memorization and improving your memory. And I would describe it as having kind of 2 things going on. The story being told in this book is Foer's year of training to enter into like the US Mental Athletes Memorization Contest. I forget the actual name of it. He's a journalist, and he was looking into like the community of mental athletes and was convinced by one of those people to try training to enter himself. And so there's that story of his own progress and what he learned about techniques for remembering things. And then the other part of it is information about memory and memorization research, case studies of really famous people who had unusual memories or just abilities, people like Kim Peek and the man who was known as S, people like that. And I preferred the latter aspect much more than the author's journey, essentially. I'm so there for basically the science and the cognitive research and stuff like that. So yeah, I think my two biggest takeaways from this book were, one, that you should not believe any self-help guru who wants to sell you really cool memory tricks. Famous people, even people like Tony Busan, who's mentioned so much in this book, they have just repackaged ancient techniques. Any technique you will learn for remembering things, like the memory palace technique, those are ancient tools that humanity has known about for millennia. And people like Tony Busan, I'm convinced, just put their own marketing spin on it and call it something new, and it's not. You can totally do it on your own without paying somebody a lot of money for a seminar or something. The other thing is the question of what is the use of memorization? Not memory, but memorization, what we would probably think of as rote memorization. Is that actually useful in the modern day? Some of the most interesting aspects that Foer touched on in this book for me was the rise and fall of memorization in education. In recent decades, memorization has been practically vilified in education and teaching techniques and stuff, and there are some educators who believe very strongly in bringing it back and other people who just think it's not worth it. Is it? Like, how would we use that? And is it better than like essentially outsourcing our memories to our digital devices? I think that's a really interesting discussion. So yeah, this book was definitely interesting, but it didn't really wow me in the end. And lastly, I binged my way through the audiobook of Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdes. This is a science fiction novel that I would most describe as just a fun adventure, a zany space romp. Unfortunately, I thought the plot was way too predictable, to the point where I was raging that characters couldn't see what was literally right in front of them. And also, I really don't like the type of character that the protagonist is. It does, however, succeed at being fun and a little bit kooky and doesn't make a lot of sense all the time, but you know, I think it's supposed to be that way. So this is about a woman named Eva Inocente. She's the captain of her own spaceship, and she and her crew are a bit down on their luck. They're trying to take only legal jobs rather than get involved in the kind of the crime work that her father does. And after a job gone wrong, where they end up with a literal spaceship full of psychic cats that keep trying to hypnotize them, Eva hears that her sister has been kidnapped and held for ransom by like a crime syndicate called The Fridge, and is trying to get her sister back either by doing work for this organization or paying money or what have you. And then there's like this B plot where she pisses off this little alien dude when he makes sexual advances to her in a bar. She rightly gets really pissed, and he's so offended that she wouldn't have sex with him that he basically wages war and kills a bunch of people because she doesn't want to belong to his harem of broodmares. It's a whole thing running throughout the book. So yeah. Unfortunately, the main character, Eva, is one of those, I think it's kind of a stereotype of a strong female protagonist, which itself is a stereotype. It's like a sub-stereotype of that, where she's strong and independent because she has a temper, she's really foul-mouthed, both in English and in Spanish, and there's a lot of Spanish dialogue in this book, which I thought was really cool. But also, she keeps making mistakes, and I feel like you're supposed to sympathize with her and think she's a good person because she realizes she's making mistakes and apologizes for them, except that doesn't really go very far. Like, just because you admit you've made a mistake doesn't mean other people should accept your apology unless you actually try to improve, and she doesn't. She makes a ton of really dumb leadership mistakes, and her crew pays for it again and again, and yet they keep taking her back. And I won't rant too long about this. I I finished this book mostly because I had nothing else to listen to at the time. I was waiting for other audiobook holds to come in and I couldn't sleep, so I was staying up late while knitting, and it was all right. Like, I'm almost at the point where I would read the second book when it comes out in this series, just because I'm kind of curious, especially about the side characters, but concerned that there won't be enough character development and change for Ava, and that would really annoy me. But anyway, that's the thing I listen to. And that is it. Those are all things I finished in the past week, and yes, I have started a slew of other books as well, so next week's wrap-up should be pretty jam-packed. Anyway, let me know if you have read any of these books, and if you have or if you want to, leave me a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching as always, and I'll be back very soon with another video, and until then, bye. You'd think after years of doing this I'd remember how to properly end a video, but anyway.